evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Oh, it is good to be back in Pennsylvania. So let me say, on behalf of myself and the first, second gentleman of the United States, my husband, Doug Emhoff, thank you for the warm welcome. And let me just say, it's good to be here with all of the friends, all of the leaders who are here. I want to thank former Governor Ed Rendell, Senator Bob Casey, who we will re-elect this November, Senator John Fetterman, Mayor Sherelle Parker, and Chairman Jamie Harrison. And it is so good to be here with your incredible Governor, Josh Shapiro. And I will say, Josh is a dear, dear friend and an extraordinary leader. He and I have been spending a lot of time together over the years. And I told Josh, look, I am so invested in our friendship in doing this together, because together with Josh Shapiro, we will win Pennsylvania. We will win Pennsylvania. And I thank you, Josh. I thank you. So Philadelphia, I launched my campaign for the President of the United States a mere 2 weeks ago. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And just last night, the delegates to the Democratic National Convention finished voting. And so I stand before you today to proudly announce I am now officially the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And so now we got some work to do. We need to move to the general election and win that. And to all the friends, listen, we also need to level set. We are the underdogs in this race. But we have the momentum, and I know exactly what we are up against. Now, many of you know, before I was elected vice president or elected a United States senator, I was an elected attorney general, and before that, elected district attorney. And before that, I was a courtroom prosecutor. So in those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who scammed consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, Donald Trump's type. let me say, hold on. This campaign, our campaign, is not just a fight against Donald Trump. Our campaign, this campaign, is a fight for the future. It's a fight for the future. In Pennsylvania, we fight for a future with affordable housing, affordable health care, affordable child care, paid leave. We fight for a future where we build a broad-based economy, where every American has the opportunity to own a home, to start a business, and to build wealth. We fight for a future where we bring down prices that are still too high and lower the cost of living for America's families, so that they have a chance not just to get by, but to get ahead. We fight for a future where we defend our most fundamental freedoms: the freedom to vote, the freedom to be safe from gun violence, the freedom to love who you love openly and with pride, and the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body, not having her government tell her what to do. I love you too. So here's the thing. Since the day that I announced my candidacy, I set out to find a partner who can help build this brighter future. A leader who will help unite our nation and move us forward. A fighter for the middle class. A patriot who believes, as I do, in the extraordinary promise of America. A promise of freedom, opportunity, and justice, not just for some, but for all. So, Pennsylvania, I'm here today because I found such a leader. Governor Tim Walz of the great state of Minnesota. So, to those who know him best, Tim is more than a governor. To his wife, Gwen, he is a husband. To his kids, Hope and Gus, he is a dad. To his fellow veterans, he is Sergeant Major Walz. To the people of southern Minnesota, for 12 years, he was congressman. To his former high school students, he was Mr. Walz. And to his former high school football players, he was coach. And in 91 days, the nation will know Coach Walz by another name, Vice President of the United States. So America, for some folks, they're just getting to know Coach Walz's story. And I'll tell you, he is the proud product of a middle-class family in rural Nebraska. He is a veteran who served our nation in uniform for more than 2 decades as a member of the Army National Guard, and he went to college on the GI Bill. He is someone who, long before he entered politics, worked as a teacher. When Coach Walz and his wife Gwen moved from his native Nebraska to Minnesota nearly 30 years ago, they both took jobs at the local high school. Coach Walz taught social studies, Gwen taught English. After school, Tim was the linebackers coach for the football team. Where I've heard the stories about he had a knack for using the game of football to teach life lessons. He saw the potential in kids who sometimes didn't even see it in themselves. Under those Friday night lights, Coach Walz motivated his players to believe they could achieve anything. And together, they defied the odds, hear this out, going from a winless record to the school's first ever state championship. And I'll say and I'll add, Tim wasn't only a role model on the football field. Around that same time, Coach Walz was approached by a student in his social studies class. The young man was one of the first openly gay students at the school and was hoping to start a gay-straight alliance. At a time when acceptance was difficult to find for LGBTQ students, Tim knew the signal that it would send to have a football coach get involved. So he signed up to be the group's faculty advisor. And as students have said, he made this school a safe place for everybody. In the high school yearbook, the students voted Coach Walz the, quote, most inspiring faculty member. And as I think everyone here can see, Tim Walz was the kind of teacher and mentor that every child in America dreams of having, and that every kid deserves. The kind of coach because he's the kind of person who makes people feel like they belong and then inspires them to dream big. And that's the kind of vice president he will be. And that's the kind of vice president America deserves. So it was Coach Walz's students who actually helped him decide to run for office. And he served 12 years in Congress, representing a purple district as he reached across the aisle to get things done. He was the highest ranking enlisted man to ever serve in the United States Congress. And the top Democrat on the Veterans Committee. And he was known as one of Capitol Hill's best marksmen, winning a bipartisan sharpshooting contest year after year. In Washington, Tim worked to raise the minimum wage, to protect the freedom of workers to join a union, and he cast one of the critical votes to pass the Affordable Care Act. Which, of course, gave health insurance to tens of millions of Americans. I'm going to tell you, when we win, Tim and I will continue to make the Affordable Care Act even stronger. We will win. We're dealing with on the other side. So on that last topic, if Donald Trump gets the chance, he will end the Affordable Care Act and take us back to a time when insurance companies had the power to deny people with pre-existing conditions. You remember what that was like? Children with asthma, breast cancer survivors, grandparents with diabetes. Well, Governor Walz and I will not let that happen. Because we believe health care should be a right and not just a privilege for those who can afford it. As governor, Tim has continued to fight for working families. He secured paid leave for workers in Minnesota. And he refused, as governor, to allow any student in their public schools to go hungry. Breakfast and lunch free for every child. And Tim Walz and I, we agree about many things, including when our middle class is strong, America is strong. And strengthening the middle class will be my defining goal as I am President of the United States. So Pennsylvania, ours is a fight for the future of the middle class, and it is a fight for freedom. In this moment, we are witnessing a full-on attack against hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights. Take reproductive freedom. Now think about this. Donald Trump said he wants to punish women. And as a result of his actions, today in America, 1 out of 3 women live in a state with a Trump abortion ban. 1 out of 3. Some of these bans go back to the 1800s, even before women had a right to vote. Think about that. Well, Tim and I have a message for Trump and others who want to turn back the clock on our fundamental freedoms. We're not going back. And so let me say about Tim Walz, he has shown up to stand against these attacks long before he stood on the stage with me. After Roe was overturned, he was the first governor in the country to sign a new law that enshrined reproductive freedom as a fundamental right. And with Tim Walz by my side when I am President of the United States and we win majorities in the United States Congress, we will pass a bill to restore reproductive freedom, and I will proudly sign it into law. Tim Walz has also defended the sacred freedom to vote. As governor, he signed the most significant expansion of voting rights in Minnesota in over 50 years. And with Governor Walz's help, when I am president, we are going to finally pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. We're going to get it done. So Tim is a hunter and a gun owner who believes, as the majority of gun owners do, that we need reasonable gun safety laws in America. So as governor, he expanded background checks and increased penalties for illegal firearm sales. And together, when we win in November, we are finally going to pass universal background checks, red flag laws, and an assault weapons ban. Through his work, Tim, the way I think about it, he really does shine a light on a brighter future that we can build together. In his state, he has been a model chief executive, and with his experience, I'm telling you, Tim Walz will be ready on day one. In fact, when you compare his resume shall we, to Trump's running mate, well, some might say it's like It's like a matchup between the varsity team and the JV squad. So, Pennsylvania, ultimately in this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? A country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law, or a country of chaos, fear, and hate? And here's the beauty of our democracy. We each have the power to answer that question. We each have the power to answer that question. The power is with the people. We love our country. And I believe it is the highest form of patriotism to fight for the ideals of our country. That is how we preserve the promise of America. And after all, you know, the promise of America is what makes it possible for two middle-class kids, one a daughter of Oakland, California, who was raised by a working mother, the other a son of the Nebraska Plains who grew up working on a farm, it's the promise of America, because only in America is it possible for them together to make it all the way to the White House. And so Coach Walz and I may hail from different corners of our great country, but our values are the same. And we both believe in lifting people up, not knocking them down. He and I, we both know the vast majority of people in our country have so much more in common than what separates them. When we look at folks, we see in our fellow Americans neighbors, not enemies. Not enemies. And so my promise to you is this. Our campaign will reach out to everyone, from red states to blue states, from the heartland to the coast, in rural, urban, suburban, and tribal communities. We are running a campaign on behalf of all Americans. And when elected, we will govern on behalf of all Americans. And so, with Tim Walz by my side, and with all of you at our side, let us fight for the promise of our future. And with that, I ask Pennsylvania, are you ready to make your voices heard? Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? President of the United States, Tim Walz.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, Philadelphia. Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the trust you put in me, but maybe more so, thank you for bringing back the joy. I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you and Doug, this incredible journey. And Pennsylvania, I know you know this, but my God, what a treasure you have in Josh Shapiro. Holy hell, can this guy bring the fire? He can bring the fire. This is a visionary leader. Also, I have to tell you, everybody in America knows when you need a bridge fixed, call that guy. And I think sometimes we forget, and you see people a little one-dimensional, but seeing a guy who cares so deeply about his family, a man with compassion, vision, and I'll have to tell you this, I know this from experience, there is no one you would rather go to a Springsteen concert in Jersey with than him. Than that guy. Bruce. And I can't wait for all of you and America to get to know my incredible wife, Gwen, a 29-year public school educator. Don't ever underestimate teachers. And our two beautiful kids, Hope and Gus. I couldn't be prouder to be on this ticket and to help Vice President Harris become what we all know is very, very good for us to think about. Next President of the United States of America. From her first day as a prosecutor, as a district attorney, Attorney General of the great state of California, a United States Senator, and Vice President of the United States. Vice President Harris has fought on the side of the American people. She took on the predators, she took on the fraudsters, she took down the transnational gangs, she stood up against powerful corporate interests, and she never hesitated to reach across the aisle if it meant improving people's lives. And I want all of you to hold this and don't ever underestimate the power of this. She does it all with a sense of joy. I know a little something about that commitment to people. I was born in West Point, Nebraska. I lived in Butte, a small town of 400, where community was a way of life. Growing up, I spent the summers working on the family farm. My mom and dad taught us, show generosity towards your neighbors and work for a common good. My dad served in the Army during the Korean War. And with his encouragement, at 17, I joined the Army National Guard. For 24 years, I proudly wore the uniform of this nation. The National Guard gave me purpose. It gave me the strength of a shared commitment to something greater than ourselves. And just as it did for my dad and millions of others, the GI Bill gave me a shot at a college education. My dad was a teacher. My brothers and sisters and I followed in their footsteps. 3 out of 4 of us married teachers. What we do. For nearly 20 years, I had the privilege of teaching high school social studies and coaching football. Including winning that state championship. Thank you. Don't ever close the yearbook. Don't ever. But it was my students. They encouraged me to run for office. They saw in me what I was hoping to instill in them, a commitment of common good, a belief that one person can make a difference. So in 2006, I took a leap and I ran for Congress. And because high school teachers are super optimistic, I was running in a district that had 1 Democrat since 1892. Well, my neighbors graced me with an opportunity to represent them in the United States House of Representatives. I'm proud of the work we did there together. I worked across the aisle on veterans issues, on agriculture, and on ways to grow rural economies. I learned the art of compromise without compromising my values. And now, as governor of the great state of Minnesota, I bring those experiences to bear in tackling the challenges that are facing our great state. Minnesota's strength comes from our values, our commitment to working together, to seeing past our differences, to always being willing to lend a helping hand. Those are the same values I learned on the family farm and tried to instill in my students. I took it to Congress and to the state capitol, and now Vice President Harris and I are running to take those very values to the White House. Now, Donald Trump sees the world a little differently than us. First of all, he doesn't know the first thing about service. He doesn't have time for it because he's too busy serving himself. Again and again and again, Trump weakens our economy to strengthen his own hand. He mocks our laws. He sows chaos and division. And that's to say nothing of his record as president. He froze in the face of the COVID crisis. He drove our economy into the ground. And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed. You know, some of us are, some of us in here are old enough to remember. I see you down there. I see those old white guys. Some of us are old enough to remember when it was Republicans who were talking about freedom. It turns out now what they meant was the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. In Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own damn business. These guys are after my heart chanting, mind your own damn business. That feels good, so thank you. Look, that includes IVF, and this gets personal for me and my family. When my wife and I decided to have children, we spent years going through infertility treatments. And I remember praying every night for a call for good news. The pit in my stomach when the phone rang, and the agony when we heard that the treatments hadn't worked. So it wasn't by chance that when we welcomed our daughter into the world, we named her Hope. When Vice President and I talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make your own health care decisions. And for our children to be free to go to school without worrying they'll be shot dead in their classrooms. By the way, as you heard, I was one of the best shots in Congress, but in Minnesota, we believe in the Second Amendment, but we also believe in common sense gun violence laws. Vice President Harris' idea of freedom is a ticket for education to be that ticket to the middle class, not crippling debt. Air that's clean, water that's pure, communities that are safe. A place where we settle our political differences not through violence, but with our votes. And that's what this election's about. What direction will this country go in? He's not going back. Well, Donald Trump would damn sure take us backwards. Let's be clear about that. And don't believe him when he plays dumb. He knows exactly what Project 2025 will do to restrict our freedoms. To rig the economy to help the super rich. If Trump gets a chance to return, he's going to pick up exactly where he left off 4 years ago. Only this time, it will be much, much worse. Raising costs on middle-class family. He will repeal the Affordable Care Act, no doubt about it. He'll gut Social Security and Medicare. And when somebody tells you they believe him. He said he'd ban abortion across this country, and he'll do it, whether or not Congress is there or not. Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends. And I got to tell you, his running mate shares his dangerous and backward agenda for this country. J.D. Vance literally wrote the foreword for the architect of the Project 2025 agenda. Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I got to tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. That is if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So, you see what I did there? Look. I got to tell you, pointing out just an observation of mine that I made. I just have to say it. You know it, you feel it. These guys are creepy, and yes, just weird as hell. That's what you see. That's what you see. So you know what's out there, so say it with me. We aren't going back. We aren't going back. We are not going back. So we got 91 days. My God, that's easy. We'll sleep when we're dead. Over those next 91 days and every day in the White House, I'll have Vice President Harris's back. Every single day. And we'll have yours. You know how this works. We can't do it alone. We need you, each and every one of you. Go over to KamalaHarris.com, get on board, because we need you. Freedom to make our own choices. This leader, this compassionate, careful, joyous leader believes in each and every one of you. My God, you came here tonight to sit at the very top because you love this country and you're not going back. She believes in the opportunity for every single person to join the middle class. She believes in the promise of America. We just got to fight. We just got to fight. Because as soon-to-be President Harris says, when we fight, we win. Thank you, Philadelphia. Thank you, Vice President. God bless America.
Okay, there you have it, the debut of Tim Walz as the vice presidential pick. I'm Jeff Glorin for John Dickerson tonight, and you've been listening to the debut of Tim Walz as Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate. Harris echoed a popular message of her campaign off the top there, attacking Donald Trump's criminal cases compared to hers as a prosecutor. When Tim Walz got up there, he said some of the same things. Kamala Harris referred to Walz as a dad, husband, teacher, a sergeant commander, but the expression she used most often was as Coach Walz. She kept going back to that, talking about his time as a high school football coach. You heard "we're not going back" a lot, a familiar refrain of the Harris campaign. Walz said there toward the end, talking about Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, he says, quote, "These guys are creepy. They are weird as hell." So as we see them get applause from the audience, we're going to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns from our D.C. Bureau to talk more about all of this. First time we're seeing Walz and Harris together. Caitlin, how is the political world reacting?
Hey, Jeff, good to see you. Well, a lot of people around the country are learning who Walz is. Even people who have covered politics for a long time. He hasn't really been kind of at the forefront here, and he has now been thrust into the spotlight. And Kamala Harris identified the reasons why she picked him, talking about his biography, which you mentioned. That includes not only serving in Congress, not only serving as a governor, but also serving as a football coach. She called him coach repeatedly, and that'll be interesting to see if kind of that continues on the campaign trail. turmoil. And when you look at kind of the candidates that she was considering, all of them were white men. Most of them were governors. And that's telling because Kamala Harris has said that she wants a partner in governing. So she alluded to that as well here. But this is a pick who has also gotten praise from people like Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin, which shows kind of the broader appeal that this campaign hopes he can have, not only appealing to progressives on policy and items that he's implemented in Minnesota, but also kind of that at least appearance of a folksy appeal in places like the Midwest. You also heard him contrast himself with J.D. Vance, and that is going to be, a debate to watch if it happens. This contrast between two political figures from the Midwest, and this is a campaign that will run through those Midwestern states.
Caitlin, how did Tim Walz leapfrog a couple other vice presidential candidates in Josh Shapiro and Kelly from Arizona, who arguably are bigger stars in the Democratic Party, bigger names, maybe better public speakers? How did it came together pretty quickly for Tim Walz?
Yeah, this has been an extremely tight timeline because of all the reasons that we know. And you mentioned Kelly and Shapiro. They both also come from key battleground states. I mean, Pennsylvania is a state that this campaign absolutely needs to win in order to win the White House. But what was appealing about Walz to Kamala Harris is something that you saw on stage there. They have a chemistry. They get along. They seem to like each other. They're actually the same age, just a few months apart. And she has said that she wants someone who can kind of be in the trenches with her governing. He has experience in Congress, can go to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue when needed, if needed. But you also heard her describe there how she views this campaign, and she described this ticket as the underdog ticket. And that's significant, Jeff, because no matter all of this energy that we've been seeing around Democrats that has been lacking during this campaign, there's a lot of momentum here. The polls have tightened, but this campaign also knows this is going to be a very, very close race. So if you can deploy Tim Walz to the Midwest, have him talk to voters who may have otherwise not been inclined to show up, that could be something that makes the difference here.
Yeah, she said they're the underdogs, but she also says she believes they have the momentum. We're going to bring in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes now. She's in Philadelphia. Nancy, also interesting to think about Walz's record, which is different than it has. It's been different in Minnesota than it was when he was on Capitol Hill. When he served in Congress, he was considered pretty bipartisan. He's been considered pretty liberal and pretty progressive as governor of Minnesota.
Right, and I think that that's a reflection of the political reality, first in his home district, which, as he pointed out in this speech, had generally gone for Republicans before he was elected. So he needed to hew to the political realities in that district, which was pretty moderate. And that's what you saw from Walz on Capitol Hill. And then once he became governor and he had a Democratic state legislature, he really had a very different opportunity and a different mandate. And that's when you saw him sign into law legislation that expanded paid leave in the state, that codified Roe v. Wade, that expanded free school breakfast and lunch to nearly all children in the state. What you saw here tonight was Walz really marrying his political views to those of Vice President Harris, because just as she sort of took a backseat or made a nod to President Biden's views over the past 4 years, as one must when one is the vice president, there was no daylight here on this stage, at least between where Governor Walz stands and where Vice President Harris stands.
Okay, Nancy Cordes and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much. We're going to have a lot more on the state of this race and the Harris-Walz strategy for the White House following this speech, this dual speech tonight. We're going to be right back. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Sunday morning, the TV show that changed everything, plus actor Jude Law and second gentleman Doug Emhoff. Listen for the trumpet.
I'm a voracious consumer of information and news. I am constantly curious and constantly want to learn. I know I personally want to know the basic facts of every issue and to press into the heart of the matter. Information is the currency of democracy, and that's what we bring to the table every Sunday.
Welcome to the Daily Report for August 6, 2024. I'm Jeff Glor, in for John Dickerson. The pick is in. Kamala Harris goes with a man who seemingly came out of nowhere to emerge on the national stage. We'll take a look at how Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, former teacher, veteran, and House member, emerged. Plus, reaction from Republicans, including J.D. Vance. Hamas selects its new leader, and it's the mastermind of the October 7th attacks on Israel. A Pakistani national has been arrested for plotting to kill U.S. government officials. Why the attempted assassination of former President Trump led to a flood of online threats. Debbie slowly moves north and east, bringing torrential rains. Financial markets stabilize after a flood of selling on Monday. And the Paris Olympics, day 11. The U.S. women get a stoppage time goal. The U.S. men's basketball team continues to roll. The Daily Report starts right now. All right, thanks for joining us. We begin our report with a vice presidential pick. Kamala Harris has chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. They held their first rally in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
This campaign, our campaign, is not just a fight against Donald Trump. Our campaign, this campaign, is a fight for the future.
Walz, who leaped past bigger, younger names, is a 60-year-old Army National Guard veteran and former public school teacher, currently in his second term as governor. Before that, he was a congressman for 12 years, serving a district just south of Minneapolis. He was the ranking member of the Committee for Veterans Affairs. The Republican vice presidential nominee, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, tried to get ahead of the newly minted Harris-Walz campaign by holding a rally of his own in the same city on the same day. Vance described Walz as a far-left radical. He also said he'll be ready to debate him once Walz is formally nominated at the DNC in 2 weeks. We're going to have more from the Republican campaign in just a moment, because Walz also said he couldn't wait to debate J.D. Vance. But we begin here with CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, the Democrats rolled out their 2024 stars tonight: Josh Shapiro, Kamala Harris, and Tim Walz.
They sure did, Jeff, and as you mentioned, Walz perhaps one of the lesser knowns that were mentioned. We now know that there were a total of 9 individuals vetted to serve as Harris's running mate, and it involved a process that was led by senior campaign officials and resulted in in-person meetings with the 3 finalists, Walz, Shapiro, and one of the, Mark Kelly of Arizona. There have been so many names floating around, Jeff, it's hard to keep them all straight. But she met with them Sunday and ultimately decided the Minnesota governor made the most sense. So she called him this morning. We're told that when she first called, he didn't answer it because it came up as no caller ID, as it sometimes does from phone numbers like hers. So she called again, and I think he got the hint, answered, and they're now on a tour that began tonight in Philadelphia and is coming here to the Midwest tomorrow. Eau Claire, Wisconsin is the next stop, about 90 minutes from where we're standing. They'll visit western Wisconsin, which is a part of the state where Democrats are probably weakest and need to shore up support. Now that the governor from the neighboring state's involved, perhaps they hope it'll shore things up from there. They'll go to Detroit. They were planning to go to North Carolina and Georgia, but because of the hurricane, they're diverting and just focusing instead on stops in Phoenix and Nevada, and we'll visit the Carolinas and Georgia later on. But what you saw tonight in their first appearance is a pretty good example of where they think this is headed. 2 what Democrats will call happy warriors on the road to try to keep Democrats in charge of the White House and hopefully at least part of Congress, arguing that former President Trump and his running mate will take the country back, try to take away various rights. And if you look at Walz's record, what Harris campaign officials will tell us is there's a lot of similarities in what they've been doing and believe in doing. As a governor, and with a supermajority now in the legislature here in Minnesota, Walz has been able to, for example, enact protections for abortion services, stop conversion therapy for minors, put in place police reforms in the wake of George Floyd's death in 2020 that banned chokeholds and other police tactics that were used before, increase funding for training and ensure there's mental health professionals working alongside police officers. Things that check a lot of boxes. You also heard him say, for example, he's a lifelong hunter and gun owner, but believes in things like universal background checks and making sure that kids can go to school safely. That's all music to Democratic ears. The question will be, can they find swing voters, moderates in either party, who might be willing to vote for him as well?
And it's interesting how they've done this compared to Republicans, because, as you know, Donald Trump rolled out J.D. Vance at the RNC. Because of the way Kamala Harris got this nomination now unexpectedly, they do this rollout now, then they have a couple weeks until the DNC to let people know who Tim Walz is.
Right. They had to do it by tomorrow based on DNC rules that were concerned about an Ohio state law regarding ballot access that Ohio eventually changed, but Democrats, fearful that Republicans would file lawsuits, wanted to get it done by tomorrow, which is the Ohio state deadline. So she's got her pick. They'll be on the road through Saturday. Next week is preparations for the convention that comes the following week, where they'll all gather in Chicago. And the way the calendar's working, announcement this week of the running mate, have them on the road the next few days, build anticipation for the convention, then the convention. Democrats, other observers believe that helps them continue building momentum against the Trump-Vance ticket. so long as there isn't some stumble or unforeseen issue or error for this campaign. We should point out $20 million raised already today since the Walz announcement, one of the better campaign fundraising days. Nothing will top the day Harris was announced when they got $100 million plus. But it's another sign that people across the country who are Democrats or lean Democrat are not only pleased with this decision, but willing to put up cash as well, which is exactly the signal that Democrats were hoping for.
And no problem sewing up union support with this pick, Ed.
That's right. On Sunday, filling in on Face the Nation, the head of UAW, Sean Fain, told me that he wanted someone like Walz in the mix because he thought that he had a pretty good labor union record. Andy Beshear of Kentucky, who was another finalist, was the other name mentioned. So yes, automatic support from labor unions, not only the auto workers, but the teachers unions, for example, because Walz is a former high school teacher, as you pointed out. That'll help in the battleground states, especially Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, in getting union households and others to turn out, because those are the folks that go knock on doors, work the phone banks, and drive people to the polls, make sure they're filling out their early ballots if they get one. That's one way the Democratic coalition often wins these tight elections. It's something Republicans know could very well spell defeat in at least some of these more competitive states.
Okay, Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. I want to bring in Joel Payne now. He's a CBS News political contributor. Joel, your reaction to the rally and the Tim Walz pick?
Jeff, good to be with you. That was quite the rally. I think that was a stemwinder from Kamala Harris and reciting her stump speech and also introducing Governor Walz. And I tell you, the story of today was a lot of people, going on Wikipedia, going on Google and learning everything they could about Tim Walz. And you might have woke up this morning with not a lot of information about him, but ending the day with that rally, millions of Americans will know who this man is, know what he stands for, and know what he brings to this ticket and why the vice president picked him. I got to say, Jeff, that was one of the more remarkable introduction speeches I've seen. That felt, and I don't want to be too hyperbolic here, that felt the type of energy and momentum that came off that speech felt very similar to what we saw from Barack Obama in the 2004 Democratic Convention. That was quite the speech, quite the introduction, and they will have a lot of wind at their back leaving Philadelphia and heading through the rest of that battleground state tour.
Joel, how critical are the next 24 to 48 hours for both Democrats and Republicans to try to define Tim Walz?
Well, the interesting thing here is that, look, of the four principals, right, Donald Trump is the most well-known. Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, J.D. Vance are all least known. And we're talking about Harris and Walz here, but particularly Walz. It is very important to do early definition. So you're going to see folks like the Harris campaign put money behind defining who Tim Walz is, telling his story, telling his biography. Obviously, they'll be out on the stump. They'll get a lot of earned media behind this, and they will be counteracting all the things that Republicans are predictably going to say about him. But it is critical, Jeff. And I think one advantage Democrats do have is not only this tour that they have coming up, but you've got the Democratic Convention coming up in less than 2 weeks, where Tim Walz will get a large national audience. And I think millions of Americans will learn even more about his family, his approach to public service, and what he brings to this ticket.
Joel, why do you think Harris chose Walz and not Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly?
Yeah, and look, I know that it feels like a zero-sum game in D.C. I don't know if this was a vote of no confidence about any other candidate, Governor Shapiro included. In fact, you heard both Governor Walz and Vice President Harris sing the praises of Governor Shapiro, and I think he's got a bright future in the Democratic Party. This was evidently about Tim Walz, both the personal chemistry that he and the vice president exhibited in their meetings, and it was obvious on stage today, but then also his story and how he tells it and how he speaks. One of the tests, Jeff, that I think about often is who has the opportunity to go to any kitchen table in America and have a conversation and at least be listened to. This is the man who, as a football coach, as a veteran, as a local elected official, as an educator, understands the walk of so many millions of Americans. And I'd imagine that the folks at Harris headquarters saw that. They felt that chemistry. They felt the opportunity to do broader storytelling. And, I think we saw that on stage today. He really, look, he knocked it out the park. I can just tell you, not just from my eyes, but from the folks who I talked to in the party, who I trust, this could not have gone better tonight. And it's pretty evident why Vice President Harris was taken with him and feels like he's the right governing partner for her.
One of the criticisms here, Joel, as you know, and one thing Republicans have seized on is that in the wake of the George Floyd murder and protests, Tim Walz, they say, just didn't do a good job, couldn't control the rioting, couldn't control the protests, and wasn't the leader that Minnesota needed at the time. How do Democrats respond to that?
Well, I think as with anything, just a few things. One, this is Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket, and Governor Walz is buying into Vice President Harris's vision of the country. That's one. Tim Walz will be the story this week, obviously, but this is about Vice President Harris, and this is the Harris-Walz ticket, not in the inverted order. Be that as it may, Republicans may try to brand this some other way. I think specific to the George Floyd protest, I think Governor Walz himself even expressed regret about how some of those days after had gone. But I think two things are interesting. One, they passed very significant legislation to address some of the challenges there in the state. And this happened before he was reelected pretty handily, I might add, in 2022. So evidently, whatever issues that Republicans are highlighting were not material enough to the people of Minnesota to not reelect him and give him a second term. And I'd imagine you're going to hear a lot of that from the vice president's campaign as well.
And Joel, quickly, his turn from a bipartisan congressman to a pretty liberal governor in Minnesota, was that changed because of the circumstance, or did the man change?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I heard the conversation with Nancy a few minutes ago. And, you know, one, I think, as she alluded to, maybe in some of the conversations she's having with the campaign, his charge was different. The work was different. The challenges in front of him were different. But one thing that wasn't different, whether or not he governed as maybe a little bit more of a moderate in Congress and governed as a little bit more of a progressive in Minnesota, his values were the same. And it's very clear that this man believes in a very populist view of the world, and the type of populism, by the way, that Kamala Harris believes in, and I think Democrats feel like is going to be really essential to turning the tide in this election. As the vice president said, and as Tim Walz said, they're the underdogs in this race. But I think that somebody who has his experience and also the broad coalition building experience, right? When you talk about someone who governed differently at different stops, what I hear is somebody who was able to adjust to the challenges, to the charge. And by the way, I'd imagine that Vice President Harris sees a little bit in Tim Walz what Barack Obama saw in Joe Biden some 15, 16 years ago when Joe Biden was chosen as the vice president. Someone who sounds like everyone, who sounds like a lot of people in your community, who has a reasonable opportunity to have a conversation with a broad swath of Americans. And I think that's what the Harris campaign heard.
Okay, Joel Payne, thank you very much. For more, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small from Cincinnati, where he is traveling with the J.D. Vance campaign. Torian, what is the messaging that J.D. Vance is using today?
Jeff, it was clear from the beginning, as soon as J.D. Vance landed in Philadelphia, his primary mission was to define Governor Walz before he had the opportunity to introduce himself on this now national stage. He painted this picture of a far-left politician, a stark contrast from what Walz defined himself during his speech tonight as this moderate who works across the aisle. But what even more interesting about these attacks that he's lobbed at Walz, he really criticized Harris's pick, and he said he felt bad for Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania for not being the pick. Ahead of this announcement, he said that he believes that Harris would go with somewhat separate because of what he called concerns about anti-Semitism within the Democratic Party, really pushing her away from that decision. I pressed him on those comments during a gaggle he held today. Take a listen.
Well, it's not what I believe. It's what the Democratic leadership has said. Many people said repeatedly that the reason Kamala Harris was going away from the Josh Shapiro selection is because they were worried about anti-Semitism. They were worried about certain voters. They were worried about some of the leaders and the grassroots activists in their party wouldn't take a Jewish nominee. I think it's despicable. I think it's disgusting.
presumably, Jeff, he's talking about Democrats like Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida, who also echoed some similar concerns he had. He actually put a tweet out saying that he was concerned that progressives are being anti-Jewish in their rhetoric or their concerns that they've expressed about Governor Shapiro there. But he also echoed this during his rally / press conference today. He said that Kamala Harris has bent a knee to the radical left side of the Democratic Party. He's calling it the Hamas wing of the Democratic Party. So he's ramping up the rhetoric to really define this ticket as far left and too radical, too progressive for moderate voters.
So Harris Walz are kicking off this, what they're calling this grand tour of battleground states. How is the Trump campaign countering, and where are they focusing the most?
Well, we know that Senator Vance is planning to tail the vice president and the governor on the trail, going to the exact same stops that they're making. So he'll be in Wisconsin and Michigan tomorrow, and it's to be seen whether or not he's going to head to North Carolina, where he had 2 events planned there. But we also know that the former president is headed to Montana to hold a rally this weekend. It's unclear whether or not when it will be the next time they join forces and do a joint rally, but that's certainly something to be expected. One other thing I want to mention, though, is that on the note of these appearances, J.D. Vance is taking a new technique in these rallies. He's also holding press conferences with media in the room. He's doing that because he wants to make the point that Kamala Harris, since she decided to jump in the race as the presidential candidate, has yet to talk to the press. He's pushing the media to press her to do a similar format of an event.
Interesting. Torian Samal, thank you, from Cincinnati, following the J.D. Vance campaign. A plot to kill public officials, including Donald Trump, has been foiled. The Justice Department charges a man in a murder-for-hire scheme. What we are learning about the suspect and who he may have been involved with. Plus, last month's assassination attempt on former President Trump generated a spike in violent rhetoric online. We're going to take a look at where those threats are coming from. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Israel has been bracing for an attack by Iran in the response to the death of a top Hamas official. But in the midst of ongoing ceasefire and hostage negotiations, Hamas has named a key figure behind the October 7th attack on Israel as its political leader. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio has more from Jerusalem. Ramy.
Jeff, hi there. Yeah, Hamas has announced that Yahya Sinwar, who's the leader of the militant group in Gaza and believed to be the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, will now become the leader of its political wing, succeeding Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in Iran last week and believed to be by Israel. Also today, President Biden spoke with the leaders of both Qatar and Egypt, who have been mediating the ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas to also try to find a way to de-escalate regional tensions before that Iranian strike. Now, if that did happen, a U.S. defense official told CBS News that an additional squadron of F-18 fighter jets have now arrived at a Middle East partner. Those jets could be used for Israel's defense to shoot down Iranian missiles and drones. Meanwhile, here in Israel, nerves got a little more frayed today when Hezbollah sent in a swarm of drones themselves from Lebanon. Several people were injured, and there was the fear that this might be in conjunction with a bigger Iranian strike. But tonight, the leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah, said that Iran, Hezbollah, and Yemen will attack at the right time and that waiting is part of the game. The takeaway here, Jeff, is that the attack on Israel has not started, but it will go ahead.
Ramy Inocencio, thank you. Immediately following last month's assassination attempt on former President Trump, there was a significant spike in calls for violence across online platforms. The research from Moonshot, which tracks domestic violent extremism online, found there were more than 1,500 calls for civil war the day after the shooting. That is up more than 600% from a normal day. Let's bring in Anna Schechter. She's the senior coordinating producer for CBS News' Crime and Public Safety Unit. As if calling for civil war can be a normal thing on a normal day. It's sort of odd to think about, but it does happen online. Anna, what kind of threats are we talking about here?
Well, there's a small subset of the far right, and some of them would even self-identify as white supremacists. And what they want is to bring about violence, like a civil war, to kind of destroy society so that it can be built up again to be better for them. And these are mostly young white men who feel like they don't have job prospects and the like. And we've seen this group growing over the years. We've seen these calls for violence also growing, and we've seen school shootings and mass shootings grow. So what Moonshot says is there needs to be more research to establish an exact causal relationship between these calls for violence, you know, I'm going to go out and do this, or encouraging each other to do it. I've reviewed a trove of these, and you see a lot of that. And they call themselves accelerationists to kind of quickly bring about this kind of violence. So it's been around. It has been growing. There needs to be more research to establish the causal relationship, but still the trend is going up.
What platforms does Moonshot say all this is taking place on?
It's a variety. So I've looked at more than 24. They don't want us to name some of these more fringe ones for fear of actually promoting them, but there are new platforms designed and targeting people who identify with the incel movement. And then there's 4chan, and then there are more mainstream websites and platforms like Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Even they're monitoring the Google searches as a gateway to get to these other platforms.
And does Moonshot feel like the major social platforms are being good about monitoring these things?
Well, they're certainly devoting a ton of resources, and they've spent a lot of money to hire these security teams and people that monitor it and eliminate this kind of content. I mean, YouTube, look at this. They just told me yesterday that in just the first quarter of 2024, they took down 2.1 million videos that violated its harmful content. And so if you think about that, and you know that they haven't gotten them all, but still, that's a huge effort on their part, but it's a game of whack-a-mole. And when we think about these most violent, extreme calls to violence, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You might have 1,500 or 1,600, and maybe only one of them is really dangerous. And that's what federal authorities are up against.
We just saw the rally introducing Tim Walz as Kamala Harris's running mate. He said he's a proud gun owner. Kamala Harris talked about that as well. You've learned something about Walz's record on guns.
Well, sure. This is out there. He had an A rating from the NRA in his early career as a congressman of a rural area in Minnesota. And he was he actually was for legislation to end restrictions on people with a history of mental health, to actually limit red flag laws and the like, and make it easier to get guns. This was earlier in his career. But after the Las Vegas shooting in 2017, he changed his tune. He put out a lengthy statement on Facebook taking a stand against these mass shootings, and he really switched gears and has actually implemented more laws in recent years for universal background checks and even to ban assault rifles. And so the NRA is now against him. He gets an F rating.
Interesting. All right. Anna Schechter, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Federal safety investigators are seeking answers from Boeing. The National Transportation Safety Board holds hearings to find out what led to that dramatic mid-air blowout on the 737 MAX jet earlier this year. We'll have more on that. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm Jeff Glor. Here are some additions to our top stories. The president of Bangladesh dissolved the country's parliament Tuesday after the resignation of its prime minister, opening the path for an election to replace her. This comes after weeks of deadly protests against a quota system for government jobs. Wall Street bounced back Tuesday after markets tumbled worldwide on Monday. The Dow, S&P 500, and the Nasdaq all closed the day up. After weeks of speculation, Vice President Kamala Harris has selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her 2024 running mate. The two are now embarking on a tour of 7 battleground states this week, starting with a rally in Philadelphia earlier. And CBS News campaign reporter Nydia Cavazos was there. She joins us from Philadelphia. Nydia, what is the Harris-Walz message?
Well, Harris and Walz just wrapped up their remarks here, but their message was very clear, established and laid out here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this was officially their first campaign event appearing as a team together. And what they were able to establish is that there's really 2 central points to their campaigns and their messaging moving forward in these last 91 days before the elections. And one, it's establishing and laying out what kind of campaign they're running on, laying out that they want to run on a campaign that's going to be expanding freedoms. They're going to be fighting for freedoms such as reproductive rights, expanding LGBTQ rights, and also providing, universal background checks when it comes to preventing gun violence. But overall, their second main point here that they were able to set clear is that they're going to be in charge and they're going to be focused on establishing the difference between the Harris and Walz campaign versus the Trump and Vance campaign. And so they were able to both establish what they're fighting for, which they really focused on their fight for freedoms, but they've also said that they're fighting for it because in the first place, they're having to do so because of the past Trump administration. And so there's 2 very key points here. One is establishing who they are and what they're running for, and also who they're running up against and what a Trump second term would entail. Okay,
Nydia Cavazos outside the Harris-Walz rally in Philadelphia. Thank you very much. I want to bring in Robbie Mook now. He was the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Robbie, good to see you. Tim Walz, known in political circles, but I think to most Americans, up until a week or so ago, not well known, if known at all. Are you surprised?
Well, I think when this whole Veep Stakes event started, he was not on the top of people's lists. But what was really remarkable was how he did move up. And I will say it was through his own success. He went viral on social media. He started people talking about Trump and Vance as weird, and he did really well on television and on podcasts and so on and so forth. You know, when you're looking for a vice presidential candidate, the first question is, are they going to do any harm? And I think he passed that pretty clearly. Second, are they going to bring something to the ticket? And that's their ability to message about Harris, about Trump, and to take some of that incoming and respond. And he really got A+ on all of those. And then the third thing is which only the vice president could decide is this someone who I have chemistry with? And they clearly, you could feel it on that stage tonight. They clearly have a good rapport, and that's probably what sealed the deal. Is there anything to the notion that the vice president might have felt like a potentially a bigger star like Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly would have overshadowed her in any possible way, and Tim Walz wouldn't? Yeah, it's interesting that people have been saying that. I don't think that's the case. I think Walz actually brought a pretty robust resume, but also set of qualities to this race. You know, his personal story about IVF is such a strong contrast to Trump and his allies trying to stop IVF. His military career, over 20 years in the National Guard. And then I would say of all of these people, his executive experience and record in Minnesota was the biggest. I think the most productive and prolific. So, you know, I didn't see from Shapiro any kind of uber ambition. What I did see was someone who won by 20 points in probably the most important state in the battleground. And so I appreciate why, you know, I would have kept him very high on the list right up until the end. We saw tonight he was really impressive in that crowd, but I think this was a very solid choice.
Some people have drawn comparisons to Hillary Clinton's pick of Tim Kaine. As a relatively safe choice in 2016, a governor. Do you think that assessment is on or no?
Well, I do think as I said earlier, you want to do no harm right off the bat. And it's very hard it's very hard to impugn Walz's character, but also his record really speaks for itself. And like I said, he did prove himself over the last few weeks that he could both be an advocate for her, but also, you know, take it to Trump. I think J.D. Vance is a very good example to me of when you pick someone based purely on these tactical measures. You know, he'll do really well with younger white men, or he's really good on Fox News. But then it all starts to unravel. There's not a very authentic connection. And then he's been saying some pretty weird things. So I don't think it's bad to pick a quote unquote safe person. I think what makes Walz safe are his outstanding credentials and the lack of ability to impugn his character or his record.
But it's interesting. You feel like it's still much more important to say do no harm as opposed to, you know, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but try to make a big difference or pick somebody who can make a splash.
I think we, particularly in the time leading up to making this choice, we tend to exaggerate the impact that that this choice can have. At the end of the day, Harris is going to have to, you know, win on her own. I'm always of the belief that a vice president can help punch out traits or qualities that you already have. I do think this is a slightly unique situation because she came into the race so late, and he's kind of rolling out, you know, what is it, 2 weeks after she got in the race, so it's about the same time. I do think the pairing is a little bit more important than, say, it was on the Clinton campaign when she'd already been running for well over a year. Yeah. But at the end of the day, this is her race, and she's going to have to win it.
What do you think Walz can help Kamala Harris with the most?
You know, it's interesting. I used to work at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee on House races, and the 2010 cycle was just a brutal cycle for Democrats. Tim Walz survived that. In 2016, Donald Trump won Walz's district by almost 15 points, and he still won that district. So I do think he has ability to communicate with a wide audience, to communicate beyond her. I also think he's going to be a very valuable asset to do a lot of these local TV hits. You know, this is very tactical, but one of the things you like to do on a campaign is sit in a little studio like I am right now and just beam around the country and talk into a whole bunch of markets, you know, in an hour or two. And that's the kind of forum where Walz really shines, particularly in the upper Midwest. And lastly, I would just say he's got a really compelling story. He can talk about gun safety as a gun owner and a hunter. He can talk about national security as a 20-year-plus National Guardsman. And he can talk about the presidency as an executive, as somebody who's running a state. So I think all those things are gonna serve the campaign very well. And I can see why, you know, having sat in these rooms and had these conversations, I could see why he was a really attractive pick.
Robbie, real quickly, before we leave, J.D. Vance is he's making it a point to meet with the press and do these press conferences after his rallies every time, and really hammering the fact that Kamala Harris is not holding press conferences and is not engaging with the press directly. Do you think that's a mistake?
Well, I think she's going to need to do some of these sit-down interviews. I think first she needs to get through the convention. So she's got a week or two to get ready for that and get through that. But she will need to do that. I do think Vance, is very, he's very well spoken at times. I think, he's not always consistent in what he says. But it's smart for the Trump people. They got to find anything they can to try to create some pressure on her, because this has been there has been a lot of momentum the last 2 weeks for her. But I think the challenge that Trump is going to have is he can't do, he can't barnstorm the way Harris is talking about doing. He's older. He doesn't have the energy, to be in a different state every day, to go on a bus tour and that sort of thing. So what I'd also expect Harris to do, in addition to engaging with the press directly, is to get out there and do some of that more dynamic campaigning that, frankly, we haven't really seen the last few years. We didn't see during COVID in 2020. And, Biden did less of in this past year.
Okay. Still 3 months to go. Robbie Mook, I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Appreciate it. Still to come here, aftermath from Debbie. We'll take a look at where the rains and wind are now. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Justice Department is charging a Pakistani national with ties to Iran over an alleged murder-for-hire plot targeting politicians and government officials, possibly including former President Trump. According to the complaint, unsealed Tuesday, 46-year-old Asif Merchant is accused of flying from Pakistan to the U.S. to recruit people to carry out his scheme. He was reported to law enforcement by an individual who then became a confidential source. The confidential source introduced Merchant to two other undercover officials he believed were hitmen. According to the complaint, Merchant subsequently paid the men $5,000 as an advance on the plot to murder officials. Officials say the scheme may be tied to Iran's vow to exact revenge for the United States' 2020 killing of General Soleimani. Over the next 2 days, top officials at Boeing will face tough questions from the National Transportation Safety Board over a mid-air door panel blowout on one of its planes earlier this year. That incident raised new questions about the company's aircraft safety. Chris Van Cleve has more details on this. Chris?
Jeff, the NTSB is in the midst of a marathon two-day investigative hearing focused on that Boeing 737 MAX door panel that blew out mid-flight in January. At least 20 hours of testimony is expected over the two-day hearing from Boeing, its key supplier Spirit Aerosystems, and the FAA. Today has focused largely on Boeing and Spirit's manufacturing process and the now well-reported issues of quality control of defects coming out of the Spirit factory and arriving in Seattle, requiring additional work. We've also gotten far more detail into the build of this airplane, the one that lost the door panel. We know that the investigators believe it left the Boeing plant without the bolts holding that door in place, leading to this accident. We don't know is why that happened. That remains one of the many unanswered questions here. We do know that work was done adjacent to that door, forcing it to be opened, and we are getting some additional details into the back and forth between Boeing and Spirit about the repairs. What's interesting here is while that panel was removed, paperwork that would normally be generated wasn't generated. Now, one of the questions was, could Boeing have caught this mistake? The fact that those bolts weren't installed, they admitted there were other opportunities to do so, but the lack of paperwork, that would have been the biggest flag that this component was missing. Jeff?
Chris Van Cleve, thanks. Tropical storm Debbie is moving north after dropping huge amounts of rain on parts of the southeast. President Biden has authorized emergency declarations from the governors of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. At least 5 people have been killed by the storm system. CBS News correspondent Christian Benavides has the latest from Savannah. Christian.
Jeff, just take a look at this. There are some roads that do remain closed, but that historic flooding that so many officials had warned about did not happen. Why did that not happen? This system that was supposed to linger here for so long, we were expecting to see rainfall all throughout the day, but that did not happen today. Thankfully, that system, Debbie, did not dump as much rainfall here as was expected. By this morning, we did have about 8 inches, and we have reached the double digits here, over 10 inches, but certainly not the catastrophic consequences that the mayor here had warned about. I will say, however, that there were some people that were impacted by this storm here in Savannah. In fact, we met one woman who had a tree fall on her apartment. She pretty much lost everything that was in her kitchen and her living room, a single mother of 4 who now has to figure out where her and her family is going to live. We also met another man whose car was actually stuck here. He had a friend come out and help him sort of just get out so that he could get his car home. The car was damaged. He believed that the car was a total loss, but at least he was able to recover that vehicle. We do know that there are a number of deaths that have been blamed on the system in Florida, and this system is now in the Atlantic. It could potentially re-strengthen. So everyone still has their guard up. But thankfully, here in Savannah, it was not, the flooding levels were not to the level that officials thought it could get to. Jeff?
Okay, Christian Benavides, thank you. Still to come here, need some inspiration? A man in his 40s wins his 5th straight gold at the Olympics, while a 14-year-old becomes the youngest to win hers. Some Tuesday motivation is up next. We like that. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Soccer to basketball. Team USA made several headlines at the Paris Olympics Tuesday. My CBS Saturday morning co-host and CBS News and sports correspondent Dana Jacobson gives us a recap of all the action. Dana.
Jeff, what some have called the redemption tour for Team USA women's soccer is nearly complete. The women with a 1-0 win over Germany on Tuesday. And that means after missing the final for the last 2 Olympics, the women are now headed to the final against Brazil on Saturday. And speaking of Brazil, when it came to basketball, that was who the competitor was for the U.S. men's team in quarterfinal action. They breezed past Brazil, no problems at all. The only thing to look for, LeBron James in the third quarter of the game did get elbowed in the eye and went out. Up next will be Serbia for the men. That game coming up for a semifinal and a chance to move on to the final. On the track, Gabby Thomas, the star of the 200-meter for the women, as expected. She makes it to the top of the podium, took the lead at the turn, and did not look back. There were 2 Americans actually on the podium this time. Brittany Brown would take the bronze, but for Thomas, the first American atop the podium in 12 years since Alex Felix did it in that 200-meter. And finally, how about the wrestler from Cuba, Mijaín Lopez? Almost 42 years old, he captures gold in Greco-Roman wrestling in the 130-kilogram category. Why does this matter? Well, he becomes the first Olympian to capture individual gold in 5 consecutive Olympic Games. Jeff, that is better than the likes of Phelps, better than the likes of Ledecky, even better than the likes of Carl Lewis.
Pretty amazing. Dana Jacobson, thank you. As athletes work toward Olympic medals in Paris, a teenager from Massachusetts is taking off to accomplish his own dreams, 30,000 feet in the air. 19-year-old Ethan Guo is aiming to become the youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents in a small plane. He took off from Geneva, Switzerland on Tuesday. His goal is to stop in 60 countries in 100 days, clocking in at over 50,000 miles. Ethan's also using the trip to raise $1 million for child cancer research in honor of his cousin. Good for him. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Vice President Harris finalizes her ticket in the race for the White House. What to expect as Harris and Tim Walz hit the campaign trail in battleground states. Plus, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump sparked a massive spike in calls for violence online, how platforms are attempting to tackle these threats. And Tropical Storm Debbie is slowly making its way up the coast, leaving flooding behind. We'll have a report from the ground in Georgia. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying that